is pasco-wa.gov. Click on the video on demand link and make your selection there. There are copies of the meeting agenda available on the back table, so you may follow along with the meeting. At this time, I would like to ask that you silence your cell phones to prevent interruptions during our meeting. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I need to remind the audience and the Planning Commission that Washington state law requires public meetings like the one being held this evening not only be fair, but also appear to be fair. In addition, Washington law prohibits Planning Commission members from participating in discussions or decisions in which the member may have a direct interest or may be either benefited or harmed by the Planning Commission's decision. An objection to any Planning Commission member hearing any matter on tonight's agenda needs to be aired at this time or it will be waived. First, are there any Planning Commission members who have a declaration at this time regarding any of the items on the agenda? Let the record show there were no declarations. Second, is there anyone in the audience this evening who would object to any Planning Commission member hearing any of the items on the agenda? Let the record show that there were no declarations. We, as a Planning Commission, need and value your input. It helps us to understand the issues more clearly and to make better recommendations to the City Council. Furthermore, in many cases, your input here at the Planning Commission meeting is your only opportunity to get your facts and opinions placed into the official record of the City Council that the City Council will use to make its decision. I encourage you to take full advantage of this opportunity. The next item is the approval of the meeting minutes from the December 19th, 2019 meeting. These minutes were mailed out to the commissioners ahead of time. I trust you had an opportunity to take a look at them. I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from the December 19th, 2019 regular meeting as presented.
I second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Rancière, seconded by Commissioner Cochran. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So let the record show that the meeting minutes were unanimously approved. It does not appear that we have any unfinished business at the time, so I am going to move on to public hearings. The first item is the comprehensive plan amendment, which is a request for a, what is it request for? It is a request made by Kidwell regarding, we're going to hear a little bit more about it from our staff person, Jacob Gonzalez. Take it away.
All right, good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Tonight's item is on a comprehensive plan land use amendment for the land use reclassification. This was an item that was brought to the Planning Commission back in November. However, due to the notifications not being sent out in time, we decided to continue the hearing till today's Planning Commission meeting. So the item in front of you today, the applicant is seeking to change the existing high-density residential land use to the mixed residential commercial designation. The site itself is approximately 3.9 acres on the northwest corner of Broadmoor Boulevard and Burns Road. It's classified as high-density residential, and it's currently zoned as R4. R4 is the city's highest intensity residential zoning district. It permits a variety of residential dwelling units ranging from single-family to multifamily condominiums, apartments, duplexes, and so forth, with those exceeding 21 units per acre. The mixed residential commercial land use that is being sought by the applicant also permits a range of uses, residential and commercial. On the residential side, it permits up to R3. And on the commercial side, it permits those uses that are permitted in the office and C1 zoning districts. So quite a variety of uses as well for the mixed residential commercial land use as well. The site is located on what is today and will eventually become two major thoroughfares for the city of Pasco and those that connect to the region. Broadmoor Boulevard is I think 12,000 vehicles are average daily use per day. That's expected to increase in the future with its connection to Interstate 182 immediately to the south. It's about a half a mile it's about a half mile north of the Interstate 182 Broadmoor Road 100 interchange. The ongoing work of the urban growth area, which you'll hear about later on this evening, along with the comprehensive plan, the citywide sewer plan, and the recently adopted capital improvement program, are all based on the existing land use remaining residential. Additionally, the city, as has been well stated previously, is expected to accommodate a population of over 121,000 by the year 2038. That's an increase of over 48,000 from today. 48,000, an extra 48,000 people equates to about just under 16,000 housing units based on today's average household size. The 3.9 acre site today offers an opportunity to accommodate some of that much needed growth. Under existing zoning, this parcel could accommodate over 60 dwelling units just on this parcel itself. A previous comprehensive plan amendment was approved by the Pasco City Council in December of 2016. In that ordinance 4327, this parcel, or a larger parcel, was approved from a land use change that changed it from low density to the high density which exists today. So this parcel has gone through a little bit of back and forth over the past few years. Due to the existing land use and zoning aligning with the established and future long-range plans of the city, staff is recommending denial of the change from the high density to the mixed residential commercial land use. Staff has received quite a bit of written comments on this one. I believe 6 that have all been included in your agenda packets today. 2, I believe, are on behalf of the applicant, and the remaining are for the denial of the approval, including a petition from an adjacent neighborhood as well. The applicant and I believe others are available, I believe, here to speak in favor or against the staff recommendation today. Additionally, because of the circumstances for tonight's meeting, staff would recommend that we continue this to the next Planning Commission meeting in April.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Commissioners, that's good. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments for city staff? Commissioner Cochran?
Yeah, I was curious about, I had 3 questions. Is there a specific criteria in Pasco code that is set forth that says what are the criteria for zone changes? And has that been evaluated in that or not? There is no criteria, or it's just if the council decides?
For a rezone, there is specific guidelines that go through our hearing examiner.
And I guess I'm not aware of those. So can you describe those criteria for us or not?
Yeah, it's a more thorough report. We'd identify what the existing zoning is, the reason for the proposed change, and try to identify any long-term impacts of what the zoning change either does to meet the long-range goals of the city.
Okay.
Planning documents a little bit more thorough than this. This is more just of a preliminary report because it's not a rezone itself. It's a land use change.
But there's no thresholds or bars or anything like that. It's just more about a reporting and analysis.
Yes, but I think what would be important to consider specifically with the amount of growth that we've experienced and are expected to continue with here in the city is if the land was redesignated for a mixed residential commercial use and we don't get the full potential of its residential development capacity, obviously, we'd have to identify other locations in the city to make up for that balance. We'd now be missing, up to 4 acres of land at high density, which we don't have much available of as it exists today. So we'd have to look for somewhere else in the city to place that. And obviously, keep in mind that many of the existing and ongoing plans that the city has been moving forward with are based on the land remaining residential.
Any other questions from the commission to staff? No? At this point, we are supposed to go to the applicant, giving the applicant an opportunity to come forward. Did we swear everyone in? We didn't do that. I didn't see it in the script here. I skipped a lot of things? Yeah, I did skip over that. So apologies, applicant, if you can just sit tight for a moment. Dun, 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 dun. Under what?
Under operations.
Oh, thank you. Excuse me. All right. So I forgot to do this. For those present this evening, when you are given the opportunity to address the commission, please come to the podium, speak clearly into the microphone, and state your name and address and the city of the address for our records. That's it? Wow. Okay. All right. So applicant, forgive me. Will you please come forward? This is your opportunity for commissioners to for the applicant to present your request.
Hello, my name is Todd Kidwell, and my address is 811 Pasco Clovis Road, my home. And I'm trying to, I guess, get this changed over so I can do a store and more commercial, a couple other things, maybe a car wash, something else is the idea, is what we're trying to do with it.
Great.
I think it's ready. I mean, there's not really anywhere else to put a nice store out there to support the community. I think I have a lot of letters from other people saying that it would be something that would be good for our community. So I hope they give me a chance to do it.
Terrific. Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind standing up at the podium. Commissioners, do we have any questions or comments for the applicant? I don't hear anything from any. Oh, yes, Commissioner Rancière.
Well, I just wanted to check. I know that the change in the zone designation would also allow some residential, is that correct? Or is it strictly commercial?
No, correct. Yeah, the mixed residential commercial allows a variety of, I think, R1 through R3.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
And do you plan on doing any residential in there or selling residential lots off of that property, or?
My plan was not to do residential, to do more commercial.
Strictly just a convenience store, gas station, possible car wash?
Maybe a coffee stand or
shop.
something. Yes, something.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I was curious, how long has TSC 2019 LLC owned the parcel?
We've just purchased it, and I think it closed in November of last year.
2019 then?
I do own 2 other stores in the town.
But
So-
that parcel was bought in November.
That was the idea, bought it to get it for a store.
Thank you.
With no questions from the line, I want to thank you, Mr. Kidwell. I think we are finished with you for now.
Thank you for
And you may be seated.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything else you'd like to discuss before I open it to the public hearing? No? All right. So we are now opening the public meeting. Any individuals who wish to speak on this particular plan, now is the time to come forward and speak. Before we do that, can I just get a show of hands to see how many of you plan on speaking to this item? Okay, thank you very much. That's about 6 people. Just so that we don't run over on this, I'm going to ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes. And Commissioner A. Campos has offered to time us. So your time will start once you finish with your name and address. So I would like now public, Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Deborah Parsons. My address is 9903 Silverbright Drive, Pasco, Washington. 9903 Silverbright Drive is right across the street from Mr. Kidwell's property. His property, what he wants to build there, a gas station, a convenience store, and a car wash, could be seen directly out my front porch. Nothing in the way. So when we found out from watching your November 14th meeting that this was going to happen, we became very alarmed because when we bought our home, we were told by the real estate agents that all of the land on the west side of Broadmoor was residential. So we take the zoning code seriously, and it helps us to make decisions as to where we want to live. So we went and talked to our neighbors. I am and my husband, we are the authors of the petition that you have. And we have 14 other homeowners who are against this as much as we are. And we would like for you to please reject Mr. Kidwell's application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parsons. Next. Just to save us time, as you see someone stepping down, make your way up to the podium, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Rich Simon. I'm with Knutson Engineering, 5401 Ridgeline Drive, Suite 160, Kennewick. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Kidwell application, and I'd like to point out that there are actually several good reasons why the city should approve this proposed comp plan amendment. The first of which is Broadmoor and Burns, an important intersection of two principal arterial streets. And there is, as that area grows, a need for neighborhood commercial services. And Kidwell's would be providing that on the 4 acres that they're proposing for this comp plan amendment. It's needed to serve the neighborhood. There really is a lack of other commercial properties in that immediate vicinity. Secondly, there are several policies within the comp plan that speak to this sort of a situation. I would point out Land Use Policy 4C, which says encourage the development of walkable communities by increasing mixed use commercial and residential developments that provide households with neighborhood and commercial shopping opportunities. So the designation of this 4 acres would do just that. Also, Land Use Policy 6A says encourage commercial and higher density residential uses along major corridors and leverage infrastructure availability. Both Broadmoor and Burns, again, are major corridors, and development of this site would help to implement the portion of the policy that speaks to encouraging commercial development along those corridors. Also, if you take a look at the draft city plan and the arterial street plan, there are a total of 23 intersections of principal arterial streets. And Pasco has over time developed their plans, and the city has developed with commercial at least one leg of those intersections in 18 of 23 of those intersecting streets. And it makes sense for that. The very few instances where those arterial intersections don't
Sir, you've
include
reached your
commercial.
time limit.
So I would just simply ask for you to take a look at the information that's in your packet. And I'd also like to indicate that there are in that packet 15 letters of support for the proposed comp plan. So we would ask for your serious consideration in approving the request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slan.
Good evening. I'm Paul Knutson with Knutson Engineering, 5401 Ridgeline Drive, Suite 160 in Kennewick. Rick and I looked at this together when we first met with Todd and his wife back here a month ago. We reviewed the web video that showed how the November hearing went, and understand and support Todd's position in what he's asking to do tonight. A couple things. I'm in a unique position that I do a lot of development work with private developers in town. One of them of which is a gentleman, Tim Bush, who you see Bush car washes pretty much everywhere. He pops up one every year. He's got one in Spokane going up. They just opened West Richland. When we started trying to put together a packet, which hopefully you guys have seen our packet tonight, he expressed interest that he had already spoken with Todd about this and was very interested in doing what he typically brings together when he does a development also, which is his car wash, a roaster's coffee, and also he's partnered with the gentleman that owns Brucci's Subs. So looking at a triad there of businesses that would potentially come in to also support this gas station. Some additional things that I'd like to add to what Rick had to say. Rick had a lot of good information there, I think, that's really relevant to consideration by the Planning Commission. But one thing that's included in the packet is we had looked at a future draft land use statement, and I don't know that it's the current one, but I highlighted, we went through and we looked at all of the acreage that was in high density residential in the plan. And there was over 300 acres. 304 acres to be exact, by my measurements, of existing high density and proposed with the draft land use plan. We're talking about taking out 4 acres of this from HDR, which equates to 1%. Because that land use plan is not finalized yet, it's possible that that can also be amended too.
Mr. Knutson, it's your time.
Oh, thank you. All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Frank Parsons. My address is 9903 Silverbright Drive. It's my wife, Deborah. I wanted to point out that this is very close to the Columbia Terrace and the Broadmoor Estates housing developments. These developments were built very close to Broadmoor. And in fact, some of the houses probably are within 25 feet of Broadmoor. So building a gas station, convenience store, car wash across the street would greatly impact these houses. The noise would be very much in everybody's house. This last month, unfortunately, they've been clearing the sand away from that sand dune. And every house in there has been shaking with all the vibration. I know that will stop, but other nuisances will start, such as lighting all night long, cars coming and going, the possibility of people robbing actually the store, because that has happened recently in Pasco, I believe. So that, along with the fact that middle school is coming in, that's 1,100 people, 1,100 students. And the elementary school with 800 students are going to be right close to that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
Good evening, Caleb Stromstead, Octare Engineering, 2705 St. Andrews Loop, Pasco. If I start rambling, give me a minute and a half, give me a nod so I can wrap it up. Thank you. I'm here in favor, just voicing my opinion in favor of the rezone application. Same with Paul, who spoke earlier. I'm a civil engineering consultant. We do a lot of development, work with a lot of developers. We're very familiar with the land use process and buffering and how that works. Broadmoor is a major collector. It's a high use street. It's going to just get, more and more use to support high density residential, and you need infill commercial like this to support it. That's a part of the comprehensive plan, to have pocket commercial. Residential uses need this kind of commercial development. It's an ideal spot for it. It's typical, and this is a good process. Nobody likes development next door. I got a pasture next door to me. I don't own that property. One day it's going to develop, and those goats that my kids get to look at, they're going to be gone. So I respect that process, but that's not reason to deny an application, right? It's a good spot for it. Broadmoor Boulevard is, like I said, going to continue to grow, and we need this type of commercial infill, and it's a good location for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was impressive. Within your time limit. All right. Anyone else? No? All right, you didn't get sworn in.
I swear to tell the truth.
Do I have to read that again? No? Okay. Name and address.
Sorry, I don't give my address. My name is Steve Bauman. I do live here in Pasco. I'm a developer. I'm RP Development. And the piece of property that's right behind that, the big L-shaped piece behind this, I represent the owners for that. We're in the process of, we've turned into the city the preliminary plat for that large L-shaped piece. It's about a little bit over 100 acres. We're definitely in favor of this, and I would definitely echo what Mr. Knutson and Mr. Strom said as far as the small commercial infills being added to this area. We're definitely in favor of that. As this is a lot of density of residential, people need a place to get gas, go to the convenience store, and we would definitely be in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baum. Okay. I'm going to make the last 3 calls for public comment.
I wasn't going to make any comment, but.
Okay, please come up, sir.
My name is Jim Curtis. I'm at 9905 Kokanee Drive. And so I'm just a block down the road from this proposed piece of property. There's, down on Sandifer and Broadmoor, there's a lot of commercial property down there that's available that they could build whatever they want down there. And it's only a couple blocks down the road, and it wouldn't impact this area that much. Not only that, vehicles coming in now are doing 50 miles an hour because right at the corner of Kokanee and Broadmoor is where the speed limit changes, and semis come through there all the time at 50 miles an hour, and then they start slowing down when it gets to the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit sign. If you're going to do that, this is going to create a lot of congestion right here. And I know that I haven't seen what the future area is going to look like, but that needs to be taken into consideration. Speed limits have got to change around there, which probably will if they're going to change this into an arterial intersection. But I'm opposed to this. There's plenty of commercial property just south of here, a couple blocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Okay, going once.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
before you close the public hearing, if we are inclined to continue this, I just ask if you maybe want to leave it open for the public hearing instead of closing the public hearing. That way you don't have to reopen it.
Great reminder. That's a great reminder. Okay, so we are leaving the public hearing open till the next session, as was asked for by Mr. Gonzalez earlier. So with that, Mr. Gonzalez, can you tell us anything else that we need to know about this application?
No, I think everything's been well covered. Again, the recommendation would be to continue the hearing to the April Planning Commission meeting.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
And Madam Chair, there is the opportunity for additional comments to be submitted either in writing or electronically at the address shown. And of course, the April 16th date is the Planning Commission meeting that occurs next month.
Thank you so much for that reminder, Mr. White. All right. With that, we are moving on to the next item.
We have the motion.
Oh, we have to make a motion anyway?
I move we continue this item to the April 16th Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, aye. All those opposed say nay. Let the record show that it was moved by Commissioner Cochran and second by Commissioner A. Campos. And the motion passed unanimously. Which Campos was it? That's Jay Campos? Oh, sorry, Jay Campos. Apologies. And I do not get to strike my gavel. I'm a little upset about that, but I'll get over it. Okay, thank you very much for making those motions, my colleagues. We are now moving on to the second item of the public hearings, block grant. And this is Caper 2019. And I will now turn it over to staff to tell us more.
Madam Chair, before Ms. Pittman starts, I just want to introduce her. She's our block grant coordinator, and I'm here to tell you that the block grant program is a real detailed, precise, regulation-heavy program, and Ms. Pittman does a very good job of distilling that down into products that HUD requires. The city gets approximately $700,000 a year for a block grant, and maybe another 110 or 20 for home programs, residential programs. And of course, Planning Commission is the block grant advisory committee for those programs that you make recommendations to council. Very rarely, as a matter of fact, I can't even remember when council has gone against the Planning Commission's recommendation. But the funds are dedicated to brick and mortar projects to physically improve our community and our housing resources for low to moderate income families.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. White and Ms. Pittman.
Good evening. The Caper 2019 is the end of our grant cycle, and it's also the end of our prior 5-year consolidated plan. Not very long ago, we had the 2020-2024 consolidated plan and the 2020 annual action plan before you. This Caper is a required report for HUD that kind of sums up what we've done during that program year to meet the goals and objectives that are outlined in those plans. So the first slide is kind of a summary of the funds that were expended.
Go ahead, Angie, use the arrow.
Okay, so the first column is the budget, and that was what was included in the annual action plan. And the second column are the actual expenditures, and those numbers come from the PR 26 or the PR 54 report that's in the detailed report, and it's accumulated throughout the year as we draw down and spend the money in a program called IDIS. That's an integrated disbursement and information system that reports directly to HUD and to Congress. So, which one is it? And so this graph is a little bit more of a visual representation of what we did. The difference is that we have there, most of it is across the board and aligned with the budget, but the economic development opportunities, those are a little low because there is one activity that we haven't drawn down. It's currently undergoing a HUD finding, and so we're working through that. And so when that's completed, then we'll actually draw that down. The public facility activity, which has spent more than was actually allocated in 2019, and that's because the public facility activities don't always end the year that they're allocated. So that's carryover from prior year for the Pasco specialty kitchen facade and facility improvement project. The public service activities are right in line. So the beneficiaries proposed, these were called out in the annual action plan for decent housing. That activity was actually reports or investigations and housing units that were improved through the code enforcement program. Proposed was 520. We actually ended up with 497. More often than not, we're actually over those numbers. And that does not count the actual beneficiaries, which is an area benefit somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 or 27,000 people that are benefited from the code enforcement activities in our 4 low-mod census tracts. Economic opportunities that were proposed, 10 jobs, 10 full-time equivalent jobs to be created, 14 were actually created. The public facility activity that did not have anything reported is for sidewalk improvements that will actually be happening this year. And then public services, again, we're pretty close to what they were estimated. And then there's as close as I could get to show you where we are as far as the budget to actual. With that, if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pittman. I will now go to my fellow commissioners. Do you have any questions or comments about this block grant? I'm looking around. Yes, Ms. Commissioner Rancière.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your work. I know that this annual reporting is not pleasant and the software is not user-friendly, but you did a great job. I was thrilled to read all the different projects that are going on here in the city of Pasco. I currently work for the city of Walla Walla, and I was so excited about it. The first thing I did was I called up our CDBG person and offered to share our caper. She is on the COVID-19 quarantine right now. She does not have it. It's a citywide policy, you know, stay home if you don't need to be at work. But anyway, thank you so much for all your work on this. It's great.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other commissioners looking at me and not hearing any of them online. I will, you are the applicant technically, so,
So on page 2 of the staff report, there's a motion. This is a one and done type of thing, so
great.
it's just to recommend.
Okay, well, we have, I just have to open it up to the public. I gotta do a public hearing.
Perfect.
So let's do the public hearing first, and then we can go to the motion. All right? So, as I open the public hearing, I keep wanting to slam this down, but it's not time yet. Any individuals who wish to speak on this particular item, now is the time to come forward and speak. Please state your name and address for the record. I see no one standing. With that, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay? Going once. Going twice.
Madam Chair,
Oh, sorry.
you don't get to close the public hearing. We make a motion.
You can just make a motion?
We make a motion.
All right, go for it.
I move the Planning Commission close the public hearing and recommend the city manager approve the 2019 Consolidated Annual Plan Evaluation Report as presented.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Let the record show it was moved by Commissioner J. Campos, seconded by Commissioner Rancière. The motion passed unanimously.
Now you can slam your gavel.
Pardon me? Can I slam it now? Okay. Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you. All right. So with that, staff, can you tell us what's going to happen?
It gets signed by the city manager and gets transmitted to HUD.
Let's get that money rolling. All right. Thank you very much for that. We are now moving on to item C on the public hearing, which is the comprehensive plan amendment regarding the urban growth area. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Gonzalez.
Good evening again, members of the Planning Commission. The expansion of the urban growth area, or UGA, is a significant component of our ongoing comprehensive planning efforts. As noted, the city is expected to have a population of nearly 122,000 residents by the year 2038. The following presentation is a little bit of the description of what we've gone through over the past year or so to come up with a UGA delineation as required by the state of Washington. So the urban growth areas are required by the Growth Management Act, which requires counties and cities to designate a UGA that can reasonably accommodate the expected population growth. There's quite a bit on the screen, but some of the highlights that I reemphasize are that the UGA shall be reserved for urban growth and urban densities. And city services, specifically utilities, shall not extend outside of the UGA. And so typically within the urban growth area, and Pasco's hasn't, I believe, updated theirs in, I think since 2008 was the last major update. We'd prefer and are mandated by the state to ensure that the growth that does happen in the UGA represents an urban density of dwelling. So the existing UGA is slightly over 25,000 acres. 84% of it is within the city of Pasco's existing city limits. The remaining is Franklin County. So you can see the breakdown, and you can see that in pink, and that kind of pink peach shade is the UGA for the city of Pasco. And the remaining that you see there is the county unincorporated areas. So apologize for the screen being a little bit cut off here. Pasco's population has increased significantly, as we're all aware, over 130% since the year 2000. Obviously, 122,000 folks expected to call Pasco home in the next 18 years. The growth equates to about 15,000 new housing units, or slightly over 15,000 housing units when we talk about an extra 48,000 folks living in the city of Pasco. That is an error on the bottom. You see there, that should be 15. So in June of 2018, the city of Pasco adopted Resolution 3845 that was adopted by the city council, and that was for the first alternative. Now, that first alternative was nearly 5,000 acres. There was quite a bit of low-density residential allocated, and not a lot of commercial uses identified in that expanded area. So if you see that shaded area to the north of the pink, all of that was the original proposed UGA that was submitted to Franklin County in the summer of 2018. You can see the breakdown of uses on the bottom, 80% of it of residential, a significant component of that, most of it pretty much low density, not much allocated for commercial. In industrial was a significant portion, almost 15% for industrial. So the city received, on the right side, you'll see the draft land use map associated with that original UGA. And the city received quite a bit of comments on it, actually, and in the fall of 2018, with our consultants, issued an EIS scope that identified next steps for how to take this further. Now, obviously, this isn't moving forward here, but we received well over 30 comments from public, stakeholders, state agencies, asking Pasco to address issues on the environment, transportation, capital facilities. Obviously, for extending our UGA that far, then there's a reasonable assumption that we will be servicing it with city utilities. There's a cost to that. So the city developed a new scope for a third alternative, which I'll share later on here in the presentation, that took a much different approach, considering all the feedback we got from the public, stakeholders, and state agencies that you see identified on this list, to what we are proposing and will be proposing over the next few months here. So one of the first things we conducted was a land capacity analysis. Now, we did the land capacity analysis, which the Washington State Department of Commerce provides general guidance on how this is actually conducted. This is actually a requirement of Puget Sound counties, so it's not required east of the Cascades, but with the rapid growth that we've been experiencing here, we thought it was a great step to start identifying how we can provide some infill opportunities in the city of Pasco. So a lot of what you see there, some of it has actually been developed since October of 2018 when we began this process. But as part of the land capacity work, we looked at what vacant and underutilized parcels were available for residential development in the city of Pasco and within the UGA. And you can see the results of that. Citywide, we had about 596 acres of vacant residential acres, 161 of underutilized, and the difference between that is vacant had no structures on them. And the underutilized those are lots or parcels that They may be 2, 3, 4, 5 acres, but only have one dwelling unit on them. So under today's existing zoning zoning classification, they could re-subdivide to a higher density, meeting today's density. So we try to stay relatively conservative. We didn't want to be too aggressive with this. Other jurisdictions that have completed a land capacity analysis, the next step they would take forward would be to actually conduct a survey of these folks, of these property owners, to identify how willing they are to subdivide. Later on in the presentation, when we identify how much land is developable, we take into account right-of-way considerations, a market factor, environmental considerations. Those are all things that are provided by the Washington State Department of Commerce as general guidance on how to try to get this as close to reality as we can. So with looking at underutilized and vacant properties within the entire UGA, we were able to significantly reduce the expansion area by almost 30%. So from about 4,800 acres to 3,400, plus or minus a little bit. We were able to do it obviously by looking at infill opportunities within the city limits, but also by re-identifying a much more diversity of residential densities in the expanded UGA, additional commercial designations. Broadmoor is a significant component, and although not identified here, the Port of Pasco's proposed plans along the waterfront are also a significant component of what went into this work here that allowed us to revise and decrease the UGA expansion area. You see kind of a general map of what areas you can see that are predominantly growth areas. Obviously the Broadmoor, Northwest Pasco. The UGA expansion area is that in the orange. And you can kind of see it, the area north of the Tri-Cities Pasco Airport, which we've identified in conjunction with Port of Pasco for their proposed plans north of the city limits there. And you can see the breakdown is significantly different than what was identified in alternative number 2 in 2018, 60% residential, 7%, so almost, a big jump in commercial, industrial, and obviously accommodation of Department of Natural Resource, which owns quite a bit of land in the UGA, and the accommodation of open space, parks, government facilities. Obviously that will need to be considered as we move forward here. So taking a look at the specific land uses in the expanded UGA, you can see there that the red is your commercial, the light brown is your high density, the yellow low density, and the orange is the medium density residential area. So quite a bit different than what we saw in alternative number 2. This alternative and the delineation of the land uses here follows a lot of the feedback that we got from the variety of stakeholders, commenters that we got asking for more compact growth. We're able to achieve that by revising the way land is distributed out there. You'll also notice the pattern follows what we'll get to later on actually in the Planning Commission agenda, an opportunity for us to transition more back to a grid street pattern, which has a significant benefit on the transportation system and utilities as well. Further, this obviously is going to be a little bit difficult to see, but this would be the draft future land use map that we've come up with for the comprehensive planning efforts. So that's how this all fits into the comprehensive plan. Is this would be the output of it, the future draft land use map.
Let's continue with the presentation and we can ask questions during the public hearing.
I'm almost done, promise. When speaking about the transportation network, you can see here, this is the draft street functional classification system, and you can see how up in that gray shaded area, the expanded UGA, we've tried to bring back the gridded pattern for the city of Pasco. So if we go back and look at the land use in that gray, or here it's shaded the appropriate land use color, but you can see how the grid pattern allows, so we can begin to develop these higher and more diverse residential and commercial uses along an appropriate development pattern, at least for the street system. Here you can see the difference. Gray is the city limits. That white area is existing UGA. The dark gray is what we're asking in alternative number 3, and that red hash mark is what was identified additionally in alternative number 2, so a significant decrease that we believe addresses the variety of comments that we receive, again, from public throughout this comprehensive plan process. This has been an item that has been shared with, in bits and pieces, with the Planning Commission and the City Council. I believe there was a full presentation in January of 2019. January or February of 2019, we did a full-on presentation at the council. And so obviously since then, there's been some slight revisions to the land use and industrial. We did the full-on land capacity analysis since then. But obviously it's been an item that we brought to the Planning Commission bits and pieces over the past year and a half. But as we get closer to hopefully being completed with this process, we want to bring this back a little bit more frequently for the Planning Commission, Council, and for the public to have eyes on this. So as far as next steps, draft EIS is being developed and should be ready for us in a month or so. Public agencies, public commerce will have an opportunity to take a look at that. This summer, hopefully in June, we'll begin the application process where we submit a comprehensive land use amendment to Franklin County. Before we can do that, that requires a new resolution by the City of Pasco council members, which will take place this summer, August, September, and then eventually through council adoption soon after. So we're not done yet. We have a few more processes left for us, but as far as the analytical and analysis and addressing the comments that we received over the past 2 years, we're getting close to this. So with that, I'll end my presentation and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. Commissioners, questions, Mr. Cochran?
So I noticed there was 3 different letters of support and our opposition. What wasn't clear from all of them is, for example, and maybe they'll speak, so if they're here, that's great. But for example, the Port of Pasco, I wasn't sure, are they in support of alternative 2 or alternative 3? I think the only one that was clear was the last one, which Mr. Gonzalez said, I want it to be alternative 2, but the other 2 wasn't clear which one they were supporting. So do you have a good sense of those?
Yeah, the Port of Pasco actually, I believe, also submitted a letter of support for alternative 2 when that was going through the Planning Commission and council process. Obviously, a significant component of the industrial ask is to accommodate the port's plans for what they've got identified. I believe the Ryman Industrial Center. I was right, up north of the city limits and airport. So obviously they're in support of that. I think anytime we can add industrial land for employment growth, it's a bonus for us. However, we still have to do our homework and make sure that we're not asking for more than we can reasonably accommodate for 20 years. And since we're a little bit behind the timeline here, this is 2038, so technically less than 20 years.
Okay, so Gonzalez and Port of Pasco are for alternative 2, and then Withers is opposed to which one?
I'm sorry, you're about one of these,
I'm just trying
exhibits,
to make sure
right?
I'm kind of considering the pros and the fors and against, but I wasn't sure what they're for or against.
Well, the city is moving forward with, the city will propose alternative number 3 to the Planning Commission. That'll be our formal recommendation, is that boundary to the Planning Commission, which will then make eventually a recommendation for or against to the council.
Are you finished, Commissioner Cochran? Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Rancière?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted just a quick question to staff. This is not the first time we've gone to the county for a UGA expansion, is that correct?
The last formal application was processed in June of 2018.
And did they accept that or reject it?
No, no, we pulled back.
Oh.
There were significant comments received on the initial 4,800 acre expansion, and given the circumstances, we simply pulled back and said, let's do an environmental impact statement and then the development of the third alternative, number 3, that Jacob has described.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to, first of all, say thank you so much for that update, and I do appreciate the increased commercial designations on that. I know that going up to 7% is huge in my eyes, so thank you.
Out on the line, any commissioners?
This is Ann Jordan. I do have a question.
Please proceed.
How does the time frame with this work with the other one that we were discussing earlier on is this all together, the comprehensive plan and the Broadmoor development? Is there going to be different things coming out at different times, or is the timing of everything going to be together as it goes forward?
Commissioner, we are proceeding ahead with our foot to the gas, so to speak, on the comprehensive plan development and the EIS. We've taken our foot off the gas slightly for the Broadmoor area because we were able to use the land use designations provided in the latest draft of the Broadmoor plan for our comprehensive plan land use calculation and capacity analysis. But all in all, they will probably hit the fan right about the same time. But they are separate processes.
Okay, thank you. It's kind of a big picture seeing how it's all laying out. So that kind of allows us to know how everything needs to be used going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jordan. And did I hear someone else on the line?
Yes, Commissioner Myram here.
Please proceed.
Just a question for staff. Could you speak to Road 68's capacity to handle additional commercial development further north? Not a lot of access points up there. And then part two is, I think it was Exhibit C, Thanksgiving Limited Partnership wrote a letter speaking about a soccer complex that was left out. Could you just speak to those two items for us?
Yes, as far as the transportation capacity, as Mr. White had mentioned, Broadmoor is a significant component. And what we did by being able to utilize the Broadmoor visioning along with the revised land uses allocated in the expanded UGA for the compact development alternative number 3, we're able to theoretically redistribute vehicles a little bit more efficiently by providing commercial opportunities, right? We heard this earlier in the Planning Commission meeting. Prior, the analysis had identified that there would be significant impacts to not only the very limited city streets in north of the interstate, but obviously to the interstate itself. When we don't provide any commercial opportunities for 48,000 additional people, they're all going to be forced to travel elsewhere for jobs. And responsible for us is to identify commercial opportunities, employment areas, whether it's industrial, infill, commercial, neighborhood, or larger scale in the existing city limits, within the Broadmoor area, within the expanded UGA, or along the 395 corridor, which is quite successful. So we were able to mitigate much harsher transportation challenges by delineating a much more refined land use distribution up in the expanded UGA. And so that's one of the benefits of us putting the higher density, a mix of medium, high density residential along with more commercial, is that it allows us to, at least the way the travel demand model would treat this, travel forecasting, is that it decreases trips and decreases the amount of time you're in a vehicle to go from place to place, because these commercial centers are located closer to your place of residence. So as far as the transportation capacity, one of the ways we're able to hopefully ease up Road 68 and not completely take it over the level of service that we're required to maintain by the Council of Governments is by allocating appropriate commercial development in the UGA. As far as the letter regarding the industrial addition on the northeast side, again, we had to take bits and pieces off of industrial to meet a reasonable accommodation of 20 years worth of growth. It's hard to do job forecasting, but we thought by decreasing it there, it would allow us to stay within a reasonable assumption of what we would need over the next 20 years to accommodate industrial growth in the urban growth area.
Anyone else on the line? Commissioner Rancière?
I just had a quick question for staff. Is this full presentation going to be available online?
Yeah, yes.
I have a question, or actually a comment and a question, Mr. Gonzalez. So I really appreciate in option 3 that we were able to increase density without having to stretch the growth area as much as we were previously. I noticed that the area right above the airport zone was, I don't know if you can go back to that slide. I'm just wondering, are we still planning on including that so that there can be residential development there?
I think you might be referring to this map here, and so you'll see the combination of medium density along with, you'll see the sliver of gray on the southeast side, which is the airport reserve area, right where
Yes,
the cursor
yeah,
is above.
uh-huh.
Yeah. And so those were the results of discussions that I believe happened in June or spring of 2018 between the airport, Washington State Department of Transportation, Commerce also, and city staff along with port staff as well. So this is a result of all of those discussions.
Terrific, thank you. All right, so with that, I believe we will now go to the public hearing. We're gonna open up, can I ask, oh, the applicant. Oh, I forgot about you. Sorry about that, Gary.
I don't know that I'm the applicant.
Are you you're not the applicant? No, you're not, forgive me.
And it's technically, and Madam Chair, if you want to have public comment, that's fine. It's technically, though, not a public hearing. It's just a presentation.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. White. All right, so Mr. Blau will not come up right now. And with that, you just did a presentation, so you don't need a motion from us or anything.
No, this will be an item that's going to come back throughout the rest of the spring and summer. You're going to get a lot more of the urban growth area and comprehensive plan process more formally.
This is a public hearing. It's in the public hearing agenda. It needs to be a public hearing.
If you want to comment, that's fine.
Yeah, we do.
All right, we will go back to my original plan, and I will now open up the public hearing. So now is the time for any individuals who'd like to speak on this particular item to come forward. Can I just see a show of hands? How many people are planning on speaking to this? All right, so I see 4 hands right now, maybe 5. So let's go to our 2-minute limit. Jay Campos? All right, and with that, I am now inviting you to come up to speak. Please state your name and address for the record.
Deborah Parsons, 9903 Silver Bright Drive, Pasco, Washington. As part of the urban growth area that's north of Burns Road in the Broadmoor area, that's the area that I live, I just have 3 questions for the commissioners. What type of industrial will be in this area? Does anyone know at this point?
Yeah, I can answer that. The industrial growth will stay along the 395 corridor, and if you actually identify on the map, that dark gray area is the airport reserve. It's area owned and operated, maintained by the Port of Pasco. They'll continue to do that. That dark gray. That lighter gray is our traditional industrial area, so it will remain along the 395 corridor where food processing already currently exists. And Franklin County already has it allocated as industrial, for industrial purpose.
Okay. Second question for the commissioners. Do you see Broadmoor Boulevard becoming as commercial as Road 68?
Broadmoor Boulevard, the Broadmoor area, just southeast of Broadmoor and Burns, will have significant commercial as a regional opportunity for commercial job growth, residential, higher densities. We will see a lot of potential growth in the Broadmoor area.
I'm talking about north of Burns Road where this urban growth area extends.
Right, to the north, you'll see some commercial, predominantly will remain low density, a combination of medium density residential, and then some slivers of commercial growth towards the northern edge of the of the UGA.
Okay, currently right now, Broadmoor Boulevard is a 2-lane road, 1 lane going each way. Do you see major widening of Broadmoor Boulevard in the future?
There will be significant capacity improvements that will be required of any property being developed adjacent, and frankly, anywhere in the UGA because of what exists or does not exist today. So you will see added lanes, you will see intersection controls for safety to be included. Traffic impact analysis will likely be required for a large portion of these developers that end up moving forward with developing parcels and lots adjacent to these arterials as we move forward. In the again, if the UGA is approved, you'll see that as a part of the development review process. So you'll see added lanes, intersections, stoplights, and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parsons. Come on down.
Good evening. I'm Gary Ballou. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the Port of Pasco. Just real quick, did want to comment. Our letter is supportive of Alternative 3. And we probably didn't clarify that in there. But we did want to just make a couple points about why we're supporting industrial development. You called us the applicant, which we're not, but we are the advocate for industrial development. So the Port of Pasco is primarily an economic development organization. It's within our strategic plan to advocate for appropriate amount of industrial lands to be available for job creation and private sector investment. So just a couple items looking at some of the existing land that we have within the UGA. One, modern day industrial development requires large parcels. They also want to be large parcels away from residential areas. So having these larger tracts is important, as is access to transportation and primarily highway and rail. So you can see that that expansion in that area is actually not a pie wedge, but on one side, on the west side, is the rail, BNSF rail corridor, and on the east side is Highway 395. Another item is that some of the areas of existing industrial land have been taken over by large purchasers. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville bought, I believe, about 160 acres. And DNR, as we got closer to the Snake River, so on the east end, bought what amounted to 450 acres of industrial land that was in the UGA. At that time that they purchased it, they said, we just want to farm it. So that was a change in use, and you can see that that area is going more to this light green DNR reserve. Yes, ma'am. 3 other items, and I will make them quick. I'm skipping some. So the other one is assessed value. Industrial development is important to the assessed value per citizen. Right now in Franklin County, assessed value is $40,000 per person. Benton County, that number is $61,000, and most of that is due to industrial and commercial development. And lastly, because of the changes in DNR, the additional request for UGA land and the change to the airport land as well, there is a swap of industrial land for industrial land. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blue, and forgive me for mistaking you for the applicant. Okay, next up.
Good evening, Caleb Stromstead, Octera Engineering, 2705 St. Andrews Loop, Pasco, Washington. I'm here tonight to just drop a lot of questions. This is the beginning of the public comment period for this new proposed Alternative 3, and it's good to get everybody's brains thinking because this is a very significant document. It's very significant. It has a lot of impact. It's more than just a bunch of pretty colors and lines. It impacts people's property, future development, and it's going to guide our city for at least the next 10 years. So we need to make sure that this is done right. And just want to throw out a few questions here. What is the objective of the changes proposed for this UGA? Are we just trying to push through a comp plan update? Because there are significant factors that need to be considered that would influence that. We're out of compliance. We're past the due date of when this is supposed to be adopted. That puts real pressure on city staff, puts real pressure on the planning commission. It puts real pressure on everybody, and it needs to be considered. City funding's in jeopardy. There's natural pressure when significant amounts of grant money could be jeopardized because we're out of compliance on our comprehensive plan. And just the natural speed of development, our community is growing. It's not going to slow down, and this isn't a new problem. We've known about this. We've had census data. This is why we're here planning for the future. And we need to make sure that these planning documents really consider that, and we're not influenced, or at least acknowledge that we are influenced by short-term gains. I'm going to go way over 2 minutes, but we got plenty of people here, or not as many people here as we would on a typical 2-minute day, so I hope that's okay. So anyways, those are real considerations. You need to consider that. Are we just pushing this through? And if we're not pushing it through, then we should be able to answer these following questions. We want to make sure we're making informed and collaborative long-term planning decisions. We just removed 300 acres with alternative 3. The original proposal 2 years ago had 1,300 more acres, so that just got removed. Why did that get removed? Are we removing it from thoughtful planning? Or are we simply reacting to the county's response? Because the county submitted a very detailed analysis of the original application, and I would encourage you to read that. It's available on the Franklin County Planning website. They have a very detailed website. There's a lot of good information on this whole process. How many acres of that 1,300 that were removed are shovel-ready, dirt-ready for development? Do we know the answer to that question? How many acres that are in the UGA are family farms that are going to stay family farms for the next 20, 40 years, that are not going to be developed as planned? Have the landowners and developers been consulted? We heard a lot of talk about stakeholder input, and we saw a slide that listed those stakeholders. They're all public agencies. It appears we're missing a critical component. Landowners, developers, real estate agents, the development community needs to be heard. And I would encourage staff to engage.
Are you finished?
And, this is important. This really is important.
I agree
I
with
can
you,
go take a
sir.
seat
I
and we
agree
can
with
come
you,
back.
sir. I would like to have staff respond to some of your questions because I
Sure.
think that might end up answering some of your other questions. Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. White.
Well, we heard the objectives for starters with Mr. Gonzalez's presentation. There was a very detailed public outreach effort for the 4,800 acre proposed expansion that involved neighborhood meetings and open houses. Obviously, we don't feel this is just being put out there for the heck of it. There's a lot of objectives considered, and I'd invite Mr. Stromstead to visit with staff, not in this setting, but at a staff level to get insight into some of his questions.
Mr. Gonzalez?
No, well, I think the alternative number 3 represents a much more practical and responsible growth pattern for the city of Pasco. By no means are we prohibiting growth outside of the UGA. It can still occur. It just must be done with Franklin County. What we're trying to do with anything within the UGA is ensure that it can be responsibly and financially serviced by the city of Pasco, our ratepayers, our taxpayers, our capital facilities plan element, and the EIS that has been developed alongside the comprehensive plan takes into account the variety of environmental considerations that go into with an expansion of 3,400 acres. 3,400 acres is still a significant expansion, and although we can justify that, we hope because of our rapid growth, The typical development pattern that we've experienced probably since 1995 or at least 2000 will not allow us to responsibly accommodate 48,000 new residents in the next 18 years. So that's why you see the bumped up densities. Bumped up densities means more efficient use of land. More efficient use of land typically means more efficient use of utilities. Means we get a better, as a taxpayer and a ratepayer paying into the system, we get more efficient use out of the things that we're paying for.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Okay.
That was well said, Mr. Gonzalez. We're in agreement in that. But you don't have all the information, and that's why we need to be engaged. One other question I have is we've shifted around land use designations. I'll point to an example. There's a 30-acre commercial site just north of Burns Road, east of Road 68, that's surrounded by a sea of single-family residential. The only justification we can get is that tricks the traffic model. Okay? If development's not going to build a 30-acre business park there, you're just getting fake data. And we can't build our land use map based on being able to manipulate the traffic model. So there's a lot of things at play here, and this is just an intro. And I know I've gone way over my time, so I'll hold the other 20 questions I have for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strom. And I just want to echo what Mr. White and Mr. Gonzalez said. We have had meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, and this planning process has been very informed by the public. And I think there is a lot of stuff on record that can help to answer your questions. Okay.
Alternative 3 is the only one I'm talking about. There has not been. Alternative 3 is the first time.
Okay. Thank you for that comment about alternative 3. All right. Anyone else like to speak?
Stephen Bauman again. Maybe consider looking into, I believe it's actually illegal for you to ask for my name and address. And I don't give my address because this is a live meeting and that's advertising that I'm not at home. And so I know the Franklin County Commissioners no longer do that because they believe that they found it to be illegal. So something to consider. The statement that there was a lot of outreach, was this prior to the submittal of in 2018?
Sorry?
All the outreach that was just stated, that there was lots of public meetings and outreach that happened, was that prior to the submittal of 2018?
Submittal to the county?
Correct.
Yes. And it included everyone within alternative 3, which is shown because the expansion area that was advertised was much larger, of course.
Okay. So it was prior to the submittal in 2018, so for well over a year, there's been little to no outreach. Is that a fairly accurate statement?
Mr. Bowman, define outreach, please.
It was just stated that there was a lot of outreach that happened in this process, and I seen Mr. Stromsted's surprise, and I was in the same as a developer that's developed multiple hundreds and hundreds of lots over the last several years. I wasn't aware, and I mean, I'm pretty engaged, but I wasn't aware of there being any public input on this process.
Any comments from the staff?
Well, we sent out 300 notices for tonight's hearing, so I guess that's a significant outreach effort.
This is 2020. I don't know. I'm not trying to cause a scene. It's been a reoccurring thing of not getting input of some of the key players, and I would definitely agree with Mr. Stromsted. And there's more than just government agencies that need to be pursued in this. I remember that one of the representatives of that piece of ground that he stated, it's the little square block. I don't know how I can point to it. Is there we go. So this block of land right here, I remember when one of the representatives that represents that piece of land, when I told him that was commercial, and he said, no, it's not. It's ours. They never said anything to us. And I said, no, I've actually seen the map, and it's actually there. So I think that's a really good example of people not being consulted. It's their land. They absolutely need to have some say-so in it. I think this process is overdue, and I'm not sure why it's taken so long. If we submitted it in 2018, we need to get on the we need to make this process move forward. As a developer here, I represent quite a bit of land in both the stuff that's already in the urban growth area as well as some that needs to come in, and it has impacted some purchases that we are trying to make very significantly, in that we're just keep kicking the can down the road, and we need to not do that. In the business world, we work off of a calendar. We can't work off of, we're working on it. We can't work off of, we're hoping for. Those kinds of things in the business world don't work. I think everybody in the room is in agreement that Pasco's on the grow. We're moving forward. And I think everybody wants growth. I don't know that they don't, and it does need to be organized. But at the same time, we need to get the key players together. We need to make decisions, and we need to make measurable progress forward. We need to get a plan ready and submitted to Franklin County that, like was stated before, Franklin County's their plan. You can go look at it and read it, is organized and prepared. We need to get in the same way. We need to get ready, get it prepared, and if we need a consultant or other people to help, I understand that happens. I do the same, but this process needs to move forward, and it needs to move forward quickly. We've had ample opportunity, and we've waited a long time, and it's time to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bauman. No. Okay, please come up.
Paul Knutson again, 5401 Ridgeline Drive, Kennewick. That's my work address, so it's okay, I'm not there. Very good, well thought out comments. I appreciated both from Mr. Stromstad and Mr. Bauman. One thing that really strikes me is there is urgency for this to get done. I'm working with another client, the Pasco School District, that owns some property they purchased in December that is also outside of the UGA, and it's urgent that comes within the city so they can get their utilities to it and be able to serve the kids, the population, the citizens of Pasco, because they've got 16 portables at their Chiawana High School, which is the largest high school in the Tri-Cities. Pasco is the same way, Pasco High. Some of the things to kind of echo what they talked about earlier, the grid pattern on the streets. Getting input from other agencies, whereas, it's typically okay, public agencies you're dealing with, but certainly inviting the development community, the engineering community, to have some kind of say in that. The landholder, current landholder, getting their input is a very good idea, and I echo their sentiments as well. But and I don't mean to go back to the first issue that was on the public hearing tonight, but I couldn't help myself but to do it. But it's the continuance on that item. Very disappointed that something that's been on the docket since November, pushed back to February, but there wasn't a quorum, I don't believe, at that planning commission, comes before the planning commission again tonight, and well documented, I think, as far as the staff recommendation is what it was, and the applicant, his material, and those opposed to it. But to kick the can down the road again just seems a little disheartening, like not doing the job that you need to do for the citizens. And I'm not criticizing you, I hope you don't take it like that, but just recognize that it's a process that needs to make action and make things happen, and not keep talking about stuff and it not happening. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knudsen. Any other takers? All right. With that, I am going to ask, any last comments? Commissioner Rancière.
So there's just a couple of things that I wanted to just point out. It seemed like some of the comments directed towards staff made it sound like a UGA expansion was equivalent to an annexation, and it is not. So even if we have an expanded UGA, and even if we recommend a specific zoning designation for those areas, they're still not in the city. So any development agreements would still have to be dealt with through the county. So just making that clear. And then the second item on not reaching out, kicking the can down the road, that really bothers me. I can't tell you how many times we've had public meetings and there's nobody in the audience. Nobody shows up. Anybody that's upset about what's going on in the city, ask yourself, how many public hearings do you go to? How many public meetings do you attend? How many times do you go in and talk to city staff about your specific item or your specific concern? Find out why the process is what it is, and don't make assumptions. That's just me saying it as a citizen, as a commissioner, and as a city employee. Not with Pasco, but as a city employee. So I've seen it from all different sides.
Can I respond to that?
No. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rancière. Not seeing any, Commissioner J. Campos.
Yeah, I just think it's important to point out that this is a proposed thing. We are going to leave this open, so there is plenty of time for public comment. Caleb made a point. This is the time to start talking about it. We are eliciting feedback from the city for the UGA. This is very important. And seeing this map and then communicating to the city or a citizen that you've seen it, that's incorrect. This hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet. So we're proposing, we're talking about it, making decisions with feedback from the citizens. So it is a process, just like Pam said. This is very important. We take it seriously.
Thank you, Commissioner J. Campos. And anyone on the line? All right. So with that, are we going to continue this public hearing, or?
Yes, this will be continued.
So it's not necessarily to close the public hearing. Okay. Mr. White, did you want to say something?
Well, I just want to make sure the commission is aware that, as Mr. Gonzalez mentioned early in his presentation, that draft EIS kind of officially kicks off the comment period, and that's for 30 days. And that will then include more comment periods through both the commission and actually city council, because as a legislative matter, the planning commission isn't bound by the parameters of a quasi-judicial setting.
Okay, so the process continues, and thank you everyone for your comments. We are now moving on to the fourth item in the public hearing, which is a code amendment. This is about the Waterfront Development District, and Mr. Gonzalez, would you like to tell us about it?
Yes, absolutely. The Port of Pasco has proposed for a code amendment to create a new zoning district titled the Waterfront District. Rather than me steal their thunder, I'll let Gary Ballou from the Port of Pasco provide Planning Commission with an awesome presentation.
Mr. Ballou.
Thank you. Gary Ballou, Port of Pasco, Director of Economic Development. So let's see if I can get to the presentation here. There we go. So a couple different items we want to talk about is on the waterfront specifically. One of the things that we've heard from a number of community-wide planning efforts, including the Makers study, which looked at both the marine terminal area as well as the adjacent marina property from Somos Pasco, which is our We Are Pasco. That was a economic visioning project that looked at the greater Pasco area, as well as My Tri 2030. That's a Tri-Cities-wide effort. Is this idea from our citizens that they want more places along the waterfront to be able to go and visit and do things. The parks are nice, but actually having, we hear a lot of restaurants or commercial activities and shopping. With that in mind, we think this, the idea of mixed use along the waterfront or mix of uses along the waterfront is supported by the community. Sorry, I was ready to make this presentation in February, and so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Then from the Port of Pasco and our efforts. So, as I mentioned before, the Port of Pasco is an economic development organization, and one of the things is we do not have very clear-cut authority to do residential development, but we do have a clear-cut authority to do economic development. And so when we decided to look at mixed use, the commissioners, my port commissioners, passed a resolution, and they were looking at why mixed use. And prior to this, Osprey Point was really proposed as primarily an office park development. But changes in workforce where people are looking to live. They want to have the ability to live, work, and recreate all in the same area, have a walkable community. And they want that not just in urban settings like downtown Seattle, they want it in more suburban settings like the Tri-Cities. Traditional business parks are going away. I was just reading an article today in the International Economic Development Council's magazine about office parks are now, traditional office parks are converting into mixed use. So they're taking some of those buildings and trying to get a residential component into them. We mentioned Osprey Point is in an opportunity zone, which allows mixed use. We believe it's an economic development initiative that we'll be pushing forward. We also would like to see more private sector investment in East Pasco. Most of the development has occurred in West Pasco. East Pasco has been passed by for a number of that, and we believe this will provide an opportunity to really create private sector investment. So for us, because the residential component, we were interested in that as part of the mixed use, but what we are looking at is commercial commercial development either preceding the residential or happening concurrently. And so that will be a balance that we'll do as we work with developers. Okay, so now we're getting into, we have AHBL, Nicole Stickney is a consultant of ours, and she is not feeling well tonight. And in an effort of social distancing and keeping away, she's not going to be here, but this is her part of the presentation, so you guys get to listen to me a little bit more. So I will stumble through this. The vision here is for a walkable community, high densities, and a focus on quality design. Some of the allowed uses, it's pretty broad: offices, banks, the breweries, wineries, distilleries. I won't go through all of these. The food trucks and the ability to have food trucks there, public markets, restaurants and eating establishments. Some of these, we also look at some of these more light industrial uses. So these really come down to a question of size. But creameries are one. One of the things that we've seen a need for is what's called like a back to front. So you have some food manufacturing in the back, but you also have the retail component in the front. An excellent example of that is actually a winery, because often a winery will have a production facility in the back and then a tasting room in the front. Research laboratories and facilities, we still think that office component will be an important part of this, and then some smaller warehousing. So residential, we do allow some single-family detached dwellings, but the density is quite tight. We prefer multifamily, and so we'll see a lot of those. We do allow short-term vacation rental use and bed and breakfast. We would include entertainment, marinas. So we'll run through this. Artisan manufacturing was one of the items that was, I think, a new definition, so we wanted to talk about that a little bit. So this would be small scale businesses that are manufacturing artisan goods, but you could have like a small scale welding, somebody who's making metal sculpture. So you could see some of these industrial arts. Again, more focused towards sales than a production facility. And that artisan manufacturing came out of Tillamook, the city of Tillamook in Oregon. Again, I talked about the density in lot area, so we're talking about 14 units per net acre, so very tight. Residential on less than 50% of the land use area. We would like to see, while it's not required, we would like to see in-building mixed use, but we don't want to make that a requirement because that's something we've heard back from the development community on, that only works in certain areas and can be a very difficult development to actually have occur. We do have smaller lot lines, no minimum lot area for multifamily, but the lot lines can be pretty tight through here as well. But that is the intent, is to create a very dense type of development. And again, I apologize for having to read this. So these are some of the building heights that would be allowed. So 60 feet for some of the commercial office buildings, 60 feet for mixed use. So we really want this development to be a place that attracts people. So one of the things that will be required of that, what we believe will be required of that, is creating a sense of place. And one of the questions that we've had from the city as we've proposed this is the private road standard, and why the need or desire for the private road. And a couple reasons on that sense of place is we believe that the area itself will be in many ways self-contained. They'll have a lot of entertainment options, and so that the ability to close that area to public transport, or at least portions of that area, and block it off, are important for creating a live entertainment style of place. And the other item would be that along, part of the public road standard is to have a very uniform road. But sometimes when you're trying to create something, you're trying to make something look different. So we believe that the private road standard will also help us, or help our developer, in putting forward a unique experience for people. On the parking, the standard is tight. We modeled it somewhat after City of Richland's downtown, where you get shared parking assets. So if there's street parking, you can take a certain credit for that in your buildings. The intent here is to have an 18-hour live area. And so some people who live there will be working somewhere else. Some people who work there will live somewhere else. And so you get some transition in the parking there as well. But we want to maximize as much space as we can, again, increase that density, bring a lot of development and activity to that while maintaining along. So I don't know if we have a map in here, but maintaining along the waterfront would be all public access. So some of the areas that we looked at, and we modeled this after Kendall Yards in Spokane. You can see they have a market there. They have this commercial area, and then it's surrounded by pretty considerable residential development. Hillsboro, Oregon. And you can see they're engaging the area here with music and entertainment. Some more drawings there. And some of Richland's waterfront, some of the Columbia Point development as well. So both the City of Richland and City of Kennewick have a mixed use zoning, and Richland's is this waterfront zoning, and was more, I think, applicable to what we were trying to do. And so we modeled a lot after Richland's zoning as well. I have no idea what these are. So I'm going to fast forward past the really good planning stuff. And maybe Jacob would like that Nicole would probably take some time with. And Jacob,
you might want to go backwards or the other direction. I think you're going into my next presentation.
Oh, thank you. That's why,
You can do
because
it
I'm
if
looking
you'd
at this
like.
going, I
Don't steal his
recognize
thunder.
this. So we're still on AHBL. So this is your presentation?
Yeah.
There we go. That's why I didn't, okay, now I don't feel as bad that I didn't actually recognize it. So
Great.
thank you. That was the end of the presentation. That'll be available for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blau. So, Commissioner, staff, do you want to comment on anything?
Yes, I would. And as Mr. Blue mentioned, that a big component of what went into the development of the specific standards, because these deviate quite a bit from what we're used to, not only in the city of Pasco, but frankly in the region. But it's the opportunity to create something that doesn't necessarily exist today in the region. And so obviously a potential opportunity to do this along the Columbia River, along the waterfront, and working with a partner like the Port of Pasco presents a significant opportunity not only to do something unique for residents of Pasco, but I think taking advantage of the federal opportunity zone is something that should be in consideration of the Planning Commission. I think additionally bringing back investment into a part of town that hasn't necessarily seen this level of action, this level of attention should be on our minds as well when it talk about equitable distribution of economic development. This is a good thing for the city of Pasco, and although the code may look significantly different, the result is what we saw in Kendall Yards, Hillsborough, Oregon, Bend, Oregon, Spokane. This exists in quite a few other cities, much smaller than ours. And I believe it's an opportunity for us to provide something very unique for residents of the city of Pasco and in the Tri-City region. I'll add that there's still some refinement that will be necessary with the code itself. Obviously, the discussion of the private streets. And because of its proximity to the shoreline, we'll want to make sure that this is compliant with the adopted development standards of the Shoreline Master Plan. We checked what staff yesterday as far as the one that's probably the most critical, which would be the height restrictions. And just for reference, and we'll provide obviously more information, but within 200 feet of the official high water mark, heights are limited to 45 feet for mixed residential, commercial. So we'll want to make sure that as this develops, that it stays within the bounds of the Shoreline Master Program, which I believe was adopted by recommended by the Planning Commission and eventually Council in 2016. Pretty lengthy effort.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Oh, I was mistaking your hand gestures. All right. With that, commissioners, Commissioner Rossier.
You knew I was going to talk. It's my night tonight. I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Ballou. That was, an exciting presentation, even the bits you didn't know about. And I personally have lived through a waterfront revitalization such as this with the city of Bremerton. It went from a Navy laydown yard, slum housing, surface parking, and kind of a brownfield area to an absolutely beautiful, vibrant waterfront where they hold music festivals, beer and wine festivals. It's a gorgeous place, and it's well used all year round. So I'm really excited to see this thing move forward.
Thank you. I'm looking around the table. Commissioner A. Campos.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you for that awesome presentation. It is exciting. I think it is something that we absolutely need here in our city. I do want to address the parking a little bit because I know that that's always something that when something like this is such a big hit, just want to make sure that we're informed. It said something about that it's going to include some features and tools to ensure adequate parking. Can you speak a little bit to that and what that is?
Yeah, I guess before Gary gets up to the podium, is that right now the city of Pasco has one parking standard for the entire city. So one use that's in central Pasco would require the same amount of parking that exists on Road 68 or Riverview. And so what the port has proposed here is something that's much more scalable to this type of development. If you over provide parking, then you will see something similar to what you have on Road 68, which goes against what the community has asked for along Osprey Point.
Yeah, and so so some of the things that you see in the parking standards, so they are less but you still want the ability for people to park. But you do, when you have a mix of uses, you have opportunities to take some allowances for if you have residential. That time of use is going to be different than maybe the office, and then maybe the commercial, and then maybe the light industrial. So you take some credits in there. The ability to, so if you have a building that by the current city code says, okay, you have to have this many parking spaces, but within a certain walking distance of that building, you have an amount of public parking or on-street parking or some other things, you get to take a credit. And so that's really what the zoning code is taking into account, is trying to make some allowances. Now, when you have the developer come in, this is what you're reducing it, but they may actually come back and want to do a little bit more, so it kind of gets balanced out. But what you're trying to do is you are really trying to maximize that, but you still want the ability to park it. And we're still, in the Tri-Cities, we're still a driving community, so we try to balance those things out. Thank you. You're welcome.
Commissioner Cochran.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Commissioner Acampo's concern over parking. I think it'll be interesting to see as this develops how you kind of mitigate some of the parking things, because I think nothing could make everybody more excited, but then have a place that everybody hates to park at would really pour water on the fire of an exciting place to be on the waterfront and to be known. I mean, the thing, I've been to the Spokane, Kendall Yards, and also obviously Cumberland Point. The thing they have is they have lots of parking. And I don't think that'll be a concern as you develop this out, is are we going to, it would be terrible if we had so many really great places to go, but nobody could park there. So that would make it kind of defeat the purpose.
Yeah, and I just add, this is, we look at that, I know Columbia Point, and that, especially with the picture we show right in that commercial node there, I'll let you know the lodge at Columbia Point, we didn't fully park that to code, so we had it, I think that was a variance that was provided in there, and we used the variance from the downtown, and that there was some restaurant parking and yeah, where hotel guests. So that's really what you're taking credit for. And I think the thing is, when you have a destination, people's mindset changes. We talk a lot, even though the mall is closed right now, we talk a lot about the mall, people willing to go to the mall and then walk, really pretty far away to get to the store they wanted to go to, versus when they're coming into a downtown environment. I think we have the feeling we have an inalienable right to be able to park right in front of the store we want to go to, and if you're 1/10 of a mile away, it's like too far. So I think by creating that destination, you want to balance that. Certainly, we want everybody who wants to come here to be able to come here. So thank you.
Okay, anyone out on the line? Commissioners on the line? Okay, with that, I have a couple of questions someone. Commissioner Myron.
Here. Yep. Still awake on the line. Just wanted to thank Mr. Ballou and his team for this great presentation. Super exciting. Sorry I can't say so in person, but really have followed this process and really excited for that part of Pasco. Thanks again.
Thank you, Commissioner Myron. And with that, I do not hear Commissioner Jordan piping up right now, so I'm going to actually address you. And I think you did Nicole proud on your presentation, even though she couldn't be here. As I was looking at the prohibited use, what came to mind for me was some of the uses that we asked there not to be in the Downtown Pasco Development Authority. So I was just curious, I saw pawn shops listed. I didn't see tattoo parlors, things. So is that permitted?
So we also, for Osprey Point, have covenants that are recorded that do prohibit some of those type of uses that may be allowed through a zoning, but but then would be restricted through those covenants. So I'm not prepared to be able to address specifically which type of business may or may not be.
Okay, and then also you're referring to Columbia Point over here, which I know Richland is very proud of, and it is beautiful. My concern with Osprey Point is that it not necessarily just be a playground of rich people who can afford real estate here. So I was curious. I appreciate that there's mixed density, mixed uses to allow for different types of density, which I think will make the real estate there more attainable. But I was curious if you were entertaining any ideas about affordable housing.
So we may, I don't know, I don't want to say affordable housing. So as we work with our developer, I think that will get the mix of price points that we'll see in those properties. Some of those, you know, it is a new development. It is in many cases where it's multi-story, it's going to be expensive or more expensive than what you would see maybe in another. But you can also do that by reducing the footprint of some of the spaces that we see. But no, we haven't specifically looked at requiring some amount of affordable housing in that development.
Thank you for answering that question. I am in support of investigating options for affordable housing.
Just,
Rancier.
and I'm not sure who it would be, staff or Mr. Ballou, thoughts about, and this is just a suggestion, I know that it's not exactly something you could commit to or whatever, but live workspaces where it is geared more towards the artists that you're trying to attract to that community. If there are living options that are attractive to artists where they can live and work in the same space, general space.
Yeah.
I think that would be highly recommended.
Okay. Yeah, and the only thing that you're trying to balance in the development is like costs a certain amount to develop the property, and if you go below market in one space, that means you're going above on the other to kind of balance that out. So we're not opposed to it, and we will certainly investigate it. But
And
that's
it's not
kind of the
listed in the
balancing act.
residential uses.
No, I understand
So
that
that's why
ability
it was
for
just more like
loft
a
space
suggestion. Yeah.
and different. I think that's the intent here, is to provide a lot of different product types that might be an interesting fit for different folks, because we're all not looking for 3 bedrooms and 2 baths and a yard. That's where I live, and that's probably where most of us live, because that's most of the product that's available around here.
I only suggest that because I have worked with quite a few artists looking for that type of situation.
Sure, yeah, understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I know that was a presentation. Mr. Gonzalez, did you want to say something?
Yeah, we're asking for this item to be continued as well to the April Planning Commission meeting. That will provide us with some, I think, last minute time to refine portions of the code addressing the shoreline master plan compliance, along with the proper definitions and considerations for private streets within the Osprey Point or within the waterfront district. And I think any other questions that public or commission has, be able to address that within the next month and bring that back to the Planning Commission with perhaps a proposed recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. I don't want to get called out by Mr. Strom like I did last time, since this is listed as under the public hearing. So I just want to ask, is there anyone in the audience who want to make a comment? Can you raise your hand? Okay, there is someone who wants to make a comment, and this is a public hearing, so let's hear it.
Yep, I just wanted to clarify.
Can you say your name and address
Caleb
one more
Stromstead,
time? Your work
Octare
address.
Engineering, 2705 St. Andrews Loop. Some misunderstanding of what was presented earlier. Was specifically talking about alternative 3. Okay. And just
Oh, you know what? This is public hearing on this particular item.
understood.
Okay.
And I guess that's it. The the professional nature of how this public hearing is going about is disappointing. As a citizen, as someone who grew up in this town, it's disappointing.
Thank you for your comments. All right, and Mr. Baumann.
Thank you for this opportunity. I applaud the port in the consideration of parking. That's a real challenge that as developers trying to find that balance. And I believe what I heard you saying was people that leave to go to work leave an open parking stall, and if there's workspace, if there's work close, somebody could park in that stall, and that's something that Rick and I've worked at over for the last several years. We've discussed that multiple times of how to, as we try to make more density, how do we provide, because you still have to have parking, and that's a real challenge that developers in the city and the port obviously all share in common, is a challenge of how do we provide parking, and so. I'm extraordinarily involved in what's going on in the city of Pasco. I'm inside this building 3 to 5 times a week, every week for the last 3+ years. I've been to almost every regular city council meeting for the last 3 years, and I guess I need to get more involved in the planning commission meetings so that I can understand what happens here additionally as well. So applaud the port. The reason I was late to this meeting is I was coming in on an airplane and looked down on Osprey Point. It's a beautiful piece of ground. I think it could be a great opportunity for the city of Pasco, and I'm excited what I see you guys doing.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. Any other comments? All right, and with that, I do not have to.
Make a motion.
I can make a motion?
I move the Planning Commission to continue the public hearing on the proposed code amendment to the April 16, 2020 Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Let the record show that it was moved by Commissioner A. Campos and seconded by Commissioner J. Campos. And the motion passed unanimously. Terrific. So we are now moving on to workshops. And we are going to hear about street connectivity from Mr. Gonzalez.
Good evening again, members of the Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to say I can run through this quickly, but I'm really excited actually about this item and the next two, as with all this, of course. Street connectivity of our transportation system has long been a established goal by the Pasco City Council. It's been identified in various plans, project studies that have been conducted at the regional and citywide level. And so the purpose of this report is to provide an update on revisions to PMCs 2115 and 2120, specifically the lots and blocks and street chapters of our development guidelines in the zoning and the municipal code. This item was brought to you back in December of 2019, kind of as a preliminary item, and we've got this item does have quite a bit of data and detail in it, so bear with me as we move forward with this one. Obviously, the intent is to update the municipal code. So these are the two applicable municipal codes that we're going to be focusing on. As far as how to revise these in the future to meet the intent of what we all hope to have here in the city of Pasco. So what I've got here is an example of what our existing code ends up permitting, maybe not on purpose, but on accident. And we have quite a bit of these in the city of Pasco, and I just wanted to focus on these because I thought they were obviously easy to look at here, right? On that left side, you have 3,800 feet before you have any true intersection, meaning you can go either direction. That's along Sandifer. That's west of Road 68. On the other side of Road 68, east, you have 1,600 feet. The code actually has a provision that requires blocks to be at maximum 1,320, but because we don't definitively define blocks specifically, it allows for a broad interpretation to occur, and we end up with locations like Sandifer or Burden or Sylvester and other locations in the city where we have extremely long distances before you're able to go north, south, east, or west in an appropriate manner. Here's an example of what it would take if you didn't want to drive or bike or walk on Burns or do the same on Sandifer. This is the only pattern, the only route you could take to get between Broadmoor or Burns Road, Broadmoor Boulevard and Road 68. And I think what's interesting here and what we should notice is that there's quite a few commercial opportunities for folks to shop and dine at, obviously along Sandifer as that's growing. There's a school and neighborhood parks, and there's quite a bit of density and residential built up, but the access between both major corridors in the end makes them less efficient because we pile on to the Road 90 intersection, or recently next to the water towers, Road 76, as we see those queues begin to stack up and become longer and longer. If you look south of Sandifer, there is the same pattern exists where there's no opportunity to logically go east-west within the neighborhoods. Here you see that a little bit more broken up. There's components of it. You see missing links. Forced travel, forces vehicles or other modes of travel users to access at busier locations because so few of them actually exist within our neighborhoods. And we believe that because our code it offers some guidelines but is very broad, there's quite a bit of room left for interpretation, and we'd like to shore that up as we move forward with accommodating close to 50,000 people here in the city of Pasco. By contrast, here's what we have not too far from where we're at today, the traditional grid pattern. But even here, you don't have complete thoroughfares, but even with major public facilities like Edgar Brown Stadium, Pasco High School, one of the largest stadiums, one of the largest high schools in the state, parks, a variety of residential and commercial uses at much higher densities, you see that there's much more opportunity for travel, regardless of mode, whether you'd like to take the bus. The bus obviously operates much more efficiently and much more successfully as a public agency when they have a predictable pattern to plan their routes. Obviously, we would believe that would help folks looking to build and develop in the city of Pasco if they know exactly or have a little bit of a handle of what the future will look like. So you see the difference between these two development patterns and this one. Obviously, this was developed at a much different era. Like most cities, we started like this and ended up towards this. And what we'd like to do is identify a blend that works for the city of Pasco. Obviously, this is much smaller blocks that no city is doing today. But if we continue to do this, we will increase the amount of transportation difficulties we have in Northwest Pasco. So here's a comparison, and I believe you saw these at the December workshop, where it compares Pasco's in blue here. You can see the block length. Some of the cities use width, so I just whatever they identified with, I put here. You can see how they differ from surrounding communities and also cities of larger size or comparable. Bend, Oregon, Ellensburg, Bellingham, Spokane, Kennewick all have much smaller requirements than Pasco, and the city of Richland. On the cul-de-sac sides, we're in line with everybody else. The distance, I don't think necessarily is the problem. It's maybe more how it's applied on the cul-de-sac discussion. Some more data, and this was one that you saw back in December. This is the average intersection distance on some of the corridors in Pasco, the least and also the highest. Kind of see how that differs. West Sylvester, west of 395 has some longer distances between intersections. You can see Lewis Street is the same thing. Sandifer and Burden obviously a little bit longer because of the recent times that they've been developed. Whereas you look at Court Street, you can see it's much more defined as smaller block areas, which we'll get into here next. Block size and block area. I told you there was going to be a lot of data, so I'll try to be easy on this one. Block size and area. So both are extremely important to compact development, walkability aspects, transit feasibility, and also efficient movement of travel. That left graph you see is the average block size between Pasco, the different size of blocks compared against other jurisdictions. So you can see that Pasco has a significant component that's in that green area, which is 5 to 9 acres. and a little bit less, which is at 17.5 to 60 acres. You can see how that compares against other jurisdictions. And this is just to provide some background information when we can look and see how cities look the way they look. Well, street pattern is a primary component of that. On the right side, you see the block perimeter, so the length, the footage, the foot distance around each block, because block size and block length don't necessarily correspond to each other either, and you'll see that in the next screen. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the next screen, my apologies. Intersection density and cul-de-sac density is another measurement that's widely used in transportation planning to identify efficient modes of travel. This is just random, try to be relatively logical with the breakdown of neighborhoods here. East of Oregon Avenue, 2 sections in central Pasco, and then areas west of Pasco broken out into 4 areas. You can see that the numbers in black is the intersection density. The number in red in parentheses is the cul-de-sacs, and you can see as you get away from central Pasco, the intersection density decreases, and this is per square mile. So it's not total, it's per square mile. That in that northwest area, you have 52 intersection points per square mile, but compared to east of Oregon Avenue, you're looking at 68, or Central Pasco, which is more than double that. You can the different development patterns, and you can see the same thing with the cul-de-sacs as well. So for future code considerations, and keep in mind that the city has begun working on our first transportation system master plan. We're working with really, really great consultants that have done quite a bit of work. Now it's a citywide effort, but a part of that master plan is taking a look at our code to make sure that projects and plans are able to be implemented with the appropriate code as staff goes through the typical preliminary plat process. So we're looking to address the block perimeter and length, mid-block connections, connection to adjacent properties, and through that identify the benefits and impacts reasonable to accessibility and safety. The City of Pasco Fire Department is definitely in favor of us taking a look at this. Obviously, they are impacted when they're trying to navigate some of these meandering roads or dead-end roads or cul-de-sacs or roads that don't connect to others. That has a significant impact on travel time for fire and emergency response. Economic development, smaller block size allows for more frontage along intersections, so obviously that's important for us. Some of the most valuable properties across the country are located in areas defined by the grid pattern, and obviously neighborhood character. So next step, we do plan to provide, and there was a supplement provided by our consultant in your packet this evening that has general information about our code, how it compares, and some things they'd like to obviously address first. But we'd like to bring this back in April with a formal code amendment. We're obviously coordinating that with our transportation system master plan. And those images you see on the right, I wanted to include because we have kind of a library in the planning office of old documents, plans, and studies. And you'll see that these studies are from 10, 15, 20 years ago that identify, in order for Pasco to efficiently move its vehicles and travelers, the grid pattern is what is best used to do that. And so this isn't something that's brand new. It's been well identified and even recently mentioned at the variety of community forums that the Pasco City Council and directors were attending over the past month or so. Numerous community members identified that more walkable, compact communities is what they sought. And while we're making quite a bit of an effort to increase density, include diversity of housing, more commercial opportunities, without a proper transportation system to facilitate that growth, we'll end up making the challenges we have today much more expensive to solve in the future. So brief preliminary analysis on the revisions to street guidelines for the City of Pasco. Not a public hearing, but obviously if commissioners have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. I am looking at my fellow commissioners, and I see that Jay Campos wants to say something.
I would just, as a citizen, what I notice when I go through a lot of these grid layer or grid developed plats, if you will, is there's stop signs everywhere. And I think that kind of impedes the flow too. So if we adopt something like this, as a citizen, I would very much like to see a little bit more fluidity going through neighborhood to neighborhood and not see stop signs at every other block.
Thank you, Commissioner J. Campos. Anyone out on the line? Commissioners on the line?
Yeah, Commissioner Myram.
Please proceed.
Just a question for Mr. Gonzalez. Can you give some practical examples of what a connectivity ordinance might include? I'm imagining some development would maybe have open or maybe temporary dead-end streets that seek to connect with future developments. So maybe that's some of the challenge today, is that we have a complete development that's finished, but we can't anticipate what the next neighborhood over is going to do. And, you know, so will that mean that we have to require some streets to just be open-ended for future connection?
Yes, the connection to adjacent properties, whether for most of what will happen in Pasco, properties that aren't yet developed, one of the ways that we can identify to make sure that it does happen is by requiring a temporary turnaround. So obviously what's adjacent to you isn't developed today, but we still want that street to continue. It makes sense for this street to continue. So that's one of the ways. Actually, the city of Ellensburg actually has that clearly written out in their code, is a temporary turnaround or a temporary stub until the adjacent properties develop will be required, so that we can ensure that eventually we can actually travel throughout our communities.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Myron. I would like to say something. Mr. Gonzalez, it made me laugh as I was looking at map 1 in the handouts, because this is my neighborhood. And my fellow commissioners have heard me speak before about how confused I am in my neighborhood. It is the least walkable place I have ever lived. Mind you, this is the first time I have not lived in a major metropolis, which for the most part are developed upon the grid patterns, which I am in favor of. But I know also the drawback to grid patterns a lot of the times is that people, because you are able to know exactly where you're going, there can also be a lot of traffic that ends up forking onto those side streets because people think they can get through them a lot more quickly. So for that reason, I can understand why a blend between the two is probably the safest bet for us. So I'm very encouraged by some of the thinking that I see in here. Okay. This isn't a public hearing, so we're not going to open it to the public right now, but Jay Campos wants to say something else.
Did you find as you were going through this data, Jacob, that why did we get off of the grid pattern? Is it because developers were forced to pack density into residential areas and they were forced to use these, patterns? What did you find?
I think most cities would like to have that answer, because most cities have dealt with that unless they were built out before 1970, 1980. I think one of the benefits, and I think one of the uses of the cul-de-sac specifically, is because you might be able to fit a few additional units. So as far as meeting density requirements or meeting housing goals, obviously that makes sense, but that can be addressed through revising our code itself. And as the Planning Commission has been gracious about over the last year or so, you've approved quite a few code amendments that have addressed density at its core, which is either through the use of private access and lots that are hard to develop where a public road is not feasible or possible, the plan unit development process, the minimum lot size and frontage reductions and height increase that took place within the last 6 or 7 months, and then the next agenda item, looking at housing diversity. So I think there's other ways to address meeting housing density that are more practical and more efficient, and I think more beneficial towards the city services over the long run than using the cul-de-sac as the only toolkit, or as the only tool.
One other thing, I guess, would be, is if we had a study done 10, 15 years ago, why are we just now looking at making changes to the code to kind of button this up?
I think we've grown quite rapidly, and I think anytime you're growing, no other community is growing as fast as Pasco in the Northwest. There's other cities that are growing fast, but obviously, as you've seen in earlier presentations, and we'll see again in the next item, the rapid growth of this entire region, and specifically Pasco, it's hard to play catch up, and so we're trying to, and eventually, and I think what's a little bit interesting here is that we're almost implementing the comprehensive plan in 2008 and the upcoming comprehensive plan as we're developing it, which I think not only buys us credibility with the stakeholders and agencies that were responsible, like WashDOT, Department of Ecology and Commerce, is that they're actually seeing us implement the actual code and development guidelines versus just telling them, yes, we're going to grow different. Well, we're going to grow differently, and here's the code amendment to prove it. So I think that buys us some credibility from the agencies we're responsible to.
Okay, not seeing any more red lights turn on. Why don't we move along to the next item in our workshop, HR 1923, and I believe Mr. Gonzalez, you are also taking this one.
Yes, and this is the last one for the night. So House Bill 1923, we've heard quite a bit about. We approached the Pasco City Council this fall after the state legislature passed House Bill 1923, which is an effort to increase residential building across the state. Obviously, housing, affordable housing density is an issue nationwide, specifically in a state growing as fast as we are. So this was the state's effort at providing incentives for jurisdictions to increase housing capacity through a variety of code amendments. They provided 13 options. If you chose 2, you were eligible for funding. Pasco chose 3, and we received funding, or will receive funding, based on completion of these code amendments that were funding made available by the Washington State Department of Commerce. So why did we do this? I think it's a unique opportunity for the city of Pasco. I don't believe any other jurisdictions outside of Walla Walla and Spokane applied for House Bill 1923 funding, and I believe those 2 were for housing action plans.
I was going to say Walla Walla, it's Walla Walla, Dayton, and Waitsburg all banded together for that one.
Okay, and so yeah, but I think it speaks to the point that there weren't many jurisdictions east of the Cascades that thought this was a opportunity for them. Obviously, we're one of the fastest growing, so it is one for Pasco. 48,000 new residents, 15,000 plus housing units. Obviously, in order for us to accommodate that, we're going to need to make some adjustments to our zoning and development standards. So some of the regional factors that are adding to the stress here is the good job growth, almost 3%. Regionally, we have a 1% vacancy rate on home buying, and then on the rental market, it's 3%. That's actually less in Pasco because we don't have a lot of rental opportunities in high-density residential zone land available in Pasco. That's actually data available from the Housing and Urban Development Department. We showed this as well back to the Pasco City Council in September, which is the cost burden component. So this is severe cost burden. So these are the households that are allocating 50% or more of their income on housing, just housing. And so in Franklin County, this is just a select few of the counties here in Washington, but about 11% of households in Franklin County spend more than half of their income on household costs itself. And at the local level, cost burden, with just regular cost burden, 30% or more of your income on housing, whether it's a mortgage or rental. You can see how Pasco compares with some of our surrounding neighborhoods or some surrounding communities. So this was a graphic that actually saw widely in quite a few planning articles, and it's hard to read here, but I'll try to do my best. It's the amount of how people are residing in the city of Pasco. We'll hear narrative of other cities as well. And you can see that Pasco has a significant component of residential dwelling units that are single-family detached. So the predominant building in the city of Pasco is the single-family detached unit. The next highest proportion are those living in RVs or mobile homes. And this next graphic shows you how that compares with surrounding communities bigger than us and across the Northwest. 71% of our households are in that detached unit, that's second most. That 9% on the very bottom living in RVs is second most. And if you go to the more denser duplex, triplex apartment units, you can see how we begin to skew towards the bottom end of providing that kind of housing opportunity in the city of Pasco, and how that compares to some of our neighboring communities. So the next question is, are we building the right kind of housing for the people that actually live and work in Pasco? Our median household income, while it's increased over the past few years, is slightly under 60,000. We have an average household size that's growing. It is higher in the 2019 estimates. 17% of households are receiving some form of supplemental income and benefit. 16.5% of our households are below the poverty level. And so when we look at the housing that's provided in Pasco and the people that actually reside in Pasco, that I think it asks us, are we building what's actually being necessary for the city? And the next way to take a look at that is looking at wages and what our employment breakdown looks like. Significant component of our workforce is in ag. That's the median, that's the annual average wage. Manufacturing is a significant component of our workforce. That's the average wage. Obviously, retail is right up there as well. Government makes up a significant component, obviously, as well here in the region. So when we look at the average wages, what people are actually bringing home compared to what it costs to buy a home, increase of this is Zillow estimates that were available as of this year. So average listing price of $309,000. The selling price is a little bit lower at $282,000. But if you see that 309 and you're looking, you're obviously going to discount quite a bit of your available options that are being available here. 172 square feet, that's the average price per square foot. And I think that's an important one because we require minimum square footage on our lots, depending on the residential zoning district. And then we also, on top of that, add average coverage. So ensure that your lot cannot be covered by a certain percentage. And I think that's how our zoning code begins to play a role in housing affordability. The average rental price in our region is $1,500. So how we travel, I'll try to explain this. This is a data available by the Center of Neighborhood Technologies, really innovative folks in data. It's a census data too. It's just put together nicely for us. You can see that 21,000 folks live in the city of Pasco and travel outside for work. So they live in the city but travel outside. Slightly over 16,000 are employed in Pasco but live outside. And then that 7,200 number, 7,199, live and work in Pasco. So of the folks that are working and are living in Pasco, a significant portion of them are actually traveling outside for jobs. Average housing or housing and transportation costs, usually we just look at housing, but transportation in an auto-oriented region like we are, transportation needs to be a considerable component of what we're doing here as well. And you can see that the average housing and transportation costs in our region or the transportation costs in Pasco is slightly over $14,000. You can see on that bottom graph how we compared to other regions, or other neighbor communities in our region. This is what you see in yellow are single family detached. That purple is multifamily, and the orange, and there's not a lot of it, are the single family attached. And obviously you can see that there's a significant majority of what we're building here in the city of Pasco. And when we compare that to when these were actually developed, that gray area is the older, the darker the green, the newer. And if we go back and forth, you can see how there was much more diverse housing built before 1980 compared to what's been built after 1980. And obviously the market has a role to play in that. But what we also understand is that our zoning code also plays a even more role in that, because we limit or potentially limit what can be built here. So the proposed code amendments that we applied for and received funding or eventual funding for was to authorize duplexes, triplexes, or courtyard apartments in residential zoning districts that permit so all of our single-family dwelling units, neighborhoods. The second proposed code amendment was to authorize cluster zoning or average lot sizing, which I think will come in handy when we try to help folks develop efficiently when they're able to utilize an average. So if the minimum requirement is 10,000 square feet, what we could potentially do with action number 2 is permit lots that go under that 10,000 square feet, but as long as the average across all of the lots being developed meets that 10,000 square foot, then you will be permitted. And the House Bill 1923 is pretty generous. They don't provide any kind of range or buffer. Obviously, we would want to do that to make sure that neighborhoods that expected to be in somewhat large lots or smaller lots see similar residents develop near them. We would just allow a little bit more of a range to be built, but want to make sure that neighborhood character is kept in here as well. Action item number 3 is one that we'll move forward with towards the end of 2020, which is accessory dwelling units, granny flats, guest homes. This is a comparison of what's permitted and what's not permitted in the city of Pasco for the first 2 action items on the duplex, triplex, and then also on the average lot size. And what we'll do moving forward, this report is just kind of a preliminary analysis on the data side, but we'll provide this information for surrounding communities as well so we can see how we stack up and if we're doing something different or in line with what our neighbors are doing. These are policies from the 2008 comprehensive plan that we believe are relevant for us moving forward with the House Bill 1923 action items. Encourage infill density, housing for all economic segments of the city, a variety of housing consistent with local and regional market. So adjusting our zoning code to allow the market to do what it wants to do addresses that, and support efforts for affordable housing. Obviously, the more diversity, the more housing we have available. The goal would be that it would perhaps make more housing available to different folks across the city. And that's the last slide. Questions?
So I think at the beginning of your presentation, you said that in Eastern Washington, it had only been Spokane and the Walla Walla trio who had applied for this. But then at another point, I thought you said we are able to take advantage of those 3 options. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, most of the cities that applied for House Bill 1923 funding were located in the Puget Sound. Obviously, they deal with a lot more strict requirements with the Growth Management Act than we do. In Eastern Washington, I know Spokane and areas near Walla Walla, as Commissioner Ranzier mentioned, applied, and I believe it was for housing action plans in Spokane, so that was a different option for folks. We do something different in the region with the home consortium, so we kind of already addressed that. A lot of that data was actually used for this report. I think for the city of Pasco, the actual code amendments made the most sense for us. As to why other jurisdictions didn't apply, I don't have the answer to that. What I do know is that Pasco is growing extremely fast, and based on the data available, we've only been providing predominantly one kind of dwelling unit, and it may be an opportunity for us to provide more for folks that choose to live and reside in Pasco.
I can speak to the Walla Walla issue just a little bit. Part of the reason why they did not go for the code amendment is because they already adopted that code. So they were the second in the state to be able to do that. And along with that, in the action item 1, it says authorize a duplex, triplex, or courtyard apartment. Would cottage housing be equivalent to the courtyard apartment?
It would be.
Right, thank you.
And there is flexibility in that. It's not all 3. It can be 1, it can be 2, it could be all 3, but it's not a requirement for all 3.
So do you need anything else from us?
Nope, we'll be bringing this probably in the summer with preliminary code amendment drafts and then move forward from there.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. But you kind of lied because we do have other business, and there is a discussion on the agenda, proposed revision to bylaws, regular meetings.
If you want to consider that tonight, there is. If not, the commission does have 2 positions that will be filled shortly, you can put this off. It was simply asking the commission again. I think I actually did this back last year. If there was any interest in exploring other starting times for the meeting dates, coincidentally, you find this odd. The last time the bylaws were amended was roughly the mid-90s, and it was to change the starting time of the meetings from 8:00 p.m. to 7 p.m. So I was going to ask if the commission thought an earlier starting time was appropriate, and if you want to wait, it's certainly fine. It's up to you.
Commissioners?
When are we gonna have the other two positions filled?
If I'm not mistaken, I think they are being interviewed on the either second workshop in April or perhaps this coming Monday. I can't recall. So appointment roughly mid-April at the latest.
Just as a comment on my end, I can't do any earlier than 6. 6 is even cutting it close.
Ditto.
This is Commissioner Jordan. I'd prefer a 6:30 or 7 start, and I'm okay waiting until we have a full commission to make that decision.
I was just going to say, I thought it would be in the interest of fairness to wait until we had our other commissioners on board.
Great. Thank you for the input, everybody. So with that, we have come to the end of our agenda. We are at adjournment. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I recommend a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Do I not need to do this? Because it's in the script. I do need to do it. Okay. So it's moved by.
I second.
Thank you. It's moved by. I don't need to say that. I can just say moved and seconded. This meeting is adjourned at 8:36 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone who's participated.